Welcome, citizens, to Pathway Online. We are so glad you joined us today because today is a great day. Today is the day that I finally capture chaos and bring her to justice. What is that? You wonder what justice is? Well, hang on because today you'll find out. But first, let's stand up and worship.
He's the one who puts the moon in the sky. He's the one who hung the stars one by one. He's the one who makes the birds sing. He's the one who makes your dreams so high. He's the one who makes me smile. Day by day, Jesus, you're my superhero. You're my star, my best friend. Jesus, you're my superhero. You're my star, my best friend. Yeah, 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 yeah. Better than Spider-Man. Yeah, 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 yeah. Better than Superman. Yeah, 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 yeah. Better than Batman. Yeah, 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 yeah. Better than anyone. Jesus, you're my superhero. You're my star, my best friend. Jesus, you're my superhero. You're my star, my best friend. Jesus, you're my superhero. You're my star, my best friend. Jesus, you're my superhero. You're my star, my best friend. Yeah, 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 yeah. Better than Yu-Gi-Oh! Yeah, 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 yeah. Better than Bobby. Yeah, 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 yeah. Better than Action Man. Better than everyone. Jesus, you're my superhero. You're my star, my best friend. Jesus, you're my superhero. You're my star, my best friend.
Whoa, stop.
What?
Can I ask you a question?
I guess so.
Why do you keep chasing me?
Because you're committing crimes, therefore you must be punished.
Why?
Because you're committing crimes and you must be punished?
Okay, but why must I be punished?
For justice!
What is justice?
Justice is where someone has committed a crime and they get the punishment they deserve. Justice is upholding what is right, and that is my mission.
So as long as I'm running, you're gonna chase me?
You got that right.
Well, then run as fast as you can, because I'm chaos, you old man.
What?
The time has come. Esther is ready to go before the king. Now, if you remember from last week, this is a pretty big deal. She had not been invited to come in and see the king. And if he did not extend his golden scepter, it would be Esther's life. She spent 3 days with all the Jews and with all of her attendants fasting before she went into this time. The time has come. We read, on the third day, Esther put on her royal robes, and she stood in the inner court of the palace, and there was the king sitting on his royal throne. And when he saw Esther, he was pleased with her, and he held out his hand with his golden scepter in it. And Esther reached out, and she touched the tip. And King Xerxes looked at her and said, "What is it, my queen? What do you want? I'll give you anything, even up to half of my kingdom." And Esther said, "If it please the king and you find favor with me, I would like you and Haman to come to a feast that I have prepared for you and dine with me tonight." And so the king and Haman went to the banquet that Esther had prepared, and they were eating and they were just drinking and enjoying themselves. And once again, the king said, "Esther, what is your request? What is it that you want? I'll give you anything you want, even up to half of my kingdom." And Esther looked at him and said, "If it pleases the king and you want to grant my request, I'll like for you and Haman to come back again tomorrow night for another feast." But remember, Haman, he's a pretty prideful and arrogant guy. So when he got up from this private feast that he had with just the king and the queen, he was feeling pretty good about himself. And as he walked out to go home, he sees his least favorite person in the world, Mordecai. And guess what Mordecai did not do? He did not bow down and show respect to Haman. Haman was furious.
That dirty Turkish harkaback flatten Morton Philip Martin Perkaloo.
Once again, the Bible says he was furious, but he managed to contain himself until he got home. And he got together with all of his friends, and he got together with his wife, and he was telling them how wealthy he was, how many sons he had, how he was so important in the kingdom. He had this big, powerful position. He was just such an amazing guy, but he couldn't even enjoy it because of this one man named Mordecai. Mordecai just really got under his skin, and he was just so angry at him. So his wife and his friends had some advice. They said, "Why don't you build a really tall pole and we can just kill Mordecai on it? That'll make you feel better, right?" Haman's like, "This is an excellent plan." That night, King Xerxes couldn't sleep. What do you do when you can't sleep? Well, why don't you just read some books, right? Not any books, but books about your reign as a king. He had his attendants bring him the books that recorded everything that happened during his time as king. And as he was reading along, he came to the part where a man named Mordecai, important fact, hope you remembered that, like Captain Powell told you to, Mordecai had discovered the plot by 2 of the king's officers to assassinate the king. Well, as the king was reading through, he asked his attendants, he said, "What was done for this guy Mordecai?" They were like, "Nothing was done for him when he did this." And the king was disturbed by this. He actually said, "Who was in the court?" Now, who do you think was out there? It just so happened to be Haman walking in. He was going to actually come in and talk to the king about impaling Mordecai on this big giant pole that he had built. So when the attendant goes out and he brings Haman into the king, and the king asks him a question. The king said, "What should be done for a man who the king wants to honor?" Well, when Haman heard this, he thought, quite obviously, the king wants to honor me. So Haman's brain is working really fast, and he's thinking, what would I want done? So he has some pretty cool advice to give to the king. He says, "For the man the king delights to honor, have them bring a royal robe that the king has worn, a horse the king has ridden, one with a royal crest placed on its head. Then let the robe and the horse be entrusted to one of the king's most noble princes. Let them robe the man the king delights to honor and lead him on the horse through the city streets, proclaiming, 'This is what is done for the man the king delights to honor.'" So Haman's pretty excited. Can you imagine? He's there thinking, this is about to happen to me. I'm going to get all this honor. But then the king looks at him and says, exactly, go and get Mordecai and do just as you have said. And Haman, lead him through the streets for me. I can't even begin to imagine what Haman was thinking. This man he was so angry at, this man he hated enough to get a law passed to kill all of his kind of people, all of the Jews. He has now got to lead through the streets proclaiming how amazing and wonderful he is. As you can imagine, this was not a great day for Haman. And when he got home that night, he sat down and he told his friends and his wife what happened. They've actually had a little bit of change in their thoughts. They looked at him and said, since Mordecai is of Jewish origin, you will not be able to stand against him. You will come to ruin.
Dun, dun, dun.
Right after Haman's wife told him this, Haman was summoned to come and join in the second feast that Esther had prepared for Haman and the king.
And you, Master Cromwell, you may tell my loyal guild of barbers to mind their own business.
And after they're eating and everything's going great, the king again looks at Esther and says, Esther, what is it that you want? What is your request? I'll give you anything, even up to half of my kingdom. And here's what Esther says. She said, if I have found favor with you, and if it pleases you, please give me my life. This is my request, and spare my people. For my people and I have been sold to be killed, destroyed, and annihilated. If we had just been sold as slaves, I would have kept quiet, because that would not have been as disturbing. And the king looked at Esther, and he's like, what? Who is he? Who is the one who would do such a thing to the queen? And Esther turns and she looks and says, my enemy is Haman.
Oh no.
Once again, can you imagine what's going through Haman's mind? All of a sudden he finds out Esther is a Jew and he is the enemy. Well, what about the king? How do you think he felt? Was he like, oh no, or okay? Well, let's check it out. It says the king got up in a rage. He left and went out to the palace garden. Now Haman, he realized what was going on. He realized it was about to be his life on the line. So he kind of fell down beside Esther to plead with her to talk to the king. Well, the king comes in and he sees him laying there and he was like, what are you doing? And he calls for his servants and immediately says, what are we going to do with Haman? And the servant said, Haman actually set a pole up out there to impale Mordecai on. But guess who instead lost their life on the pole? It was Haman.
Dun, dun, dun.
The very thing he had set up to get revenge on Haman was what happened to him. This is a pretty interesting story. What do you think? Justice. What does that word mean? Justice is the upholding of what is fair and right. It can also be defined as the giving out of something that is deserved, like a reward or a punishment. So today's story, I feel like we see justice. I want you to stop and think a minute about those definitions, especially the one that said the giving out of something that as a reward or as a punishment. Think about the story of Mordecai. Mordecai is rewarded for what he did in uncovering the plot to assassinate the king, and he is honored for that. How do you see justice being displayed in Mordecai's life? Why don't you stop for just a minute and talk about that with your family? Hit the pause button, make sure you come back. You know, the Bible tells us that God is a just God. He loves justice, and we can trust Him no matter how things look in the immediate moment. We've seen some pretty intense situations here in the book of Esther, but one thing we can see is how God was at work all along. Even if they didn't understand what was happening in the moment, if you look back, you can just see God doing His thing, taking care of things. So a good reminder that we can trust God no matter what. God is always at work in our lives.
Want to know how the battle ends? Well, come join us next week in Pathway on campus or continue watching online. I'll see you then. Come on, baby, some topics.
Where did she go? Captain Panel away!